Good morning. Francesca, can you hear me?
Sorry, what?
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Sharon. Good morning, everyone. We got in
Morning.
okay.
Good morning.
Morning, Colin.
Good morning. Whoever is hosting, could you please make Francesca Prince a co-host?
Sorry, Sharon, what was your request?
To make Francesca Prince a co-host, all you have to do is go to her name. So pull up participants, go to her name. To the right of her name, you'll be able to make her a co-host.
You got it.
Thank you.
Yep, sorry.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's 10 a.m. We're going to give people another couple minutes before we get started. I am Lloyd Schmeidler, Senior Analyst in Community Development Department. Welcome, everyone, for joining us for this Racial Equity in the Homeless Housing System workshop today.
Looks like I still need to be made into a co-host.
He may not be sure about how to do it.
Nope,
I made you one.
I said it, Francesca, make a co-host. Do you want to make Francesca Prince?
Yeah,
co-host
don't
for
make
this
me a
meeting?
co-host because it bothers my PowerPoint, but make her a co-host because she can do stuff for me.
I just made you a co-host, Francesca.
Yep, I'm good.
You're good? Perfect.
And
And
then you
then-
can remove me as a co-host.
Remove you, okay.
Mhm. Thank you, Colin.
You're very welcome, thank you. Sorry, I'm not as good at this as Ruby. She's our Zoom guru, and
That's what Francesca is for me, my Zoom.
exactly. So when I have to play the role of Ruby, it takes me a minute to pick this up. So I removed you from the co-host. Sharon, you are a Francesca, you are a co-host. Sharon, you are not. Lloyd, I made you a co-host as well, just in case.
Very good. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Well,
And
it
with
is
that, I will-
10:02 a.m., so we're going to get started. Thanks again for everyone coming. We hopefully will have a few others join us as in the next few minutes as we get started. We're delighted you joined us today for this August session of our effective case management in the homeless housing system training session. We're delighted today to have with us as our presenter and facilitator Sharon Williams. Sharon is leading the City of Durham's efforts to advance racial equity. She's a native of St. Louis and has been involved with racial equity work since the 1990s. She has bachelor's and master's degrees in business and management and has nearly completed a doctorate in leadership and equity, and we'll celebrate with her when that gets done, I'm sure. Sharon began working with the City of Durham in 2015 in her role as a human resources manager. Her work led to the creation of tools, processes, policies, and procedures that enhance the ability of city employees to contribute to organizational success. In July of 2019, she switched roles and became the city's first racial equity division manager in the new Department of Equity and Inclusion. And over the last 2 years, even in the midst of the pandemic, Sharon has formed the city's first racial equity core team, developed a racial equity action plan, and developed and delivered racial equity training. So she is well equipped to lead this training this morning. Has developed racial equity tools and is committed and has contributed to the embedding of racial equity considerations into all aspects of city governance. She's passionate about her work and is grateful for the opportunity to have a meaningful impact on employees and residents of the City of Durham by advancing racial equity. Sharon, we're delighted to have you with us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. It's a joy to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see the faces that are on camera. Right now, it's only me and Lloyd, but at least I know there are people out there, and I'm happy about that. I'm going to be sharing my screen because I will be working from a PowerPoint today. Sometimes Zoom doesn't really want me to be great, neither does PowerPoint, so we'll see how they are feeling about me today. The session today is Advancing Racial Equity in the Homeless Housing System. You all know a lot more about that than I know, and I absolutely applaud your efforts for doing that. And sorry, I do have to make one change after all. This will really be an overview of racial equity. I invite you to contribute to the conversation as we have it. So please use your voice throughout. And there are things that I will be doing to invite you into the conversation. So give me just a minute. I'm having a minor issue. I just need to figure out why. Sometimes Zoom works perfectly and other times not so much. All right, we're just going to go with what it is going to allow me to do, and I will not worry about what it won't. All right, we'll see. All right, advancing racial equity in the homeless housing system. As Lloyd said, I do work for the city of Durham. I work in the equity and inclusion department. It formerly had the name of Equal Opportunity and Equity Assurance Department. I haven't done this session before, and so I'm not quite sure how long it'll take. Lloyd said we have an hour and a half. Lloyd, is that correct? You are muted.
Yes, that's correct. Hour and a half till 11:30-ish.
Okay, thank you. And so I will probably be close to that, but not sure where. I certainly won't go over that period of time. I always like to start with a quote, and this is the one that I'd like to use today. Racial disparities exist in the homeless housing system. So racial equity work should not, cannot be the can that we kick down the road. Rather, it needs to be what we lift up and center and do to create a more equitable homeless housing system for all in the city of Durham. Virtual housekeeping, please do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Be present, participate, cameras on if you can, because it's lonely out here, but if you can't, I understand. Our agenda today, we'll be talking about racial equity, and you will be helping me to talk about it when we go through homeless housing. You've got all of the experience there. Mine is strictly in racial equity. So I'll be making the case for racial equity, talking about the language of racial equity, talking about equity, access, and opportunity, talking about what it means to cultivate racial equity, and introducing a racial equity impact assessment. I found that with some of these sessions, there's never enough time. So I know that we're going to run out of time before we can get to everything. So I invite you to offer what you can, ask for what you need. Let's have one conversation at a time and show mutual respect. If you learn anything here, or you can share anything here, please do, and take what you learn with you and accept non-closure, because I'm not an expert, even with regard to racial equity. It's just something that I'm very passionate about, and it is the nature of my work right now. I'm going to be using chat a lot, so please drop the name of your organization in chat so that I have a feel for the organizations that are in the room. We already know your name because it's next to your photo, I hope, on Zoom. And my tech support person today is Francesca Prinz, who also works in equity and inclusion. And Francesca, can you tell me the names of the organizations that you see coming up in chat?
My unmute button. All right. Let's see, we've got Alliance Health, NC Central University, Durham Technical Community College, Alliance Health, Housing for New Hope, Urban Ministries of Durham, Families Moving Forward.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for doing that. So I have an idea of who's here.
And the Durham VA, sorry.
What are you hoping to take away from today's learning experience? And you're also going to drop that in chat. If nothing comes up, maybe it's all up to me.
Oh, we're getting some. So there's also people here from the Triangle Empowerment Center and Coordinated Entry, Durham, VA. And then Christine wants to know how to better serve the community.
Good. All right, Christine, thank you for using Brave Space and letting us know what your expectations were. I have some poll questions, and we were going to do them via poll, but instead we're going to do them using the chat. So you get to use your voice. Francesca is going to read off a poll question, and you can either agree, which is an A, D, disagree, or N for neither, right? And you're going to add your A, your D, or your N to chat. Francesca, would you read the first poll question?
The first question is, homelessness is caused by structural racism and the oppression of Black and Brown people. Again, homelessness is caused by structural racism and the oppression of Brown and Black people. A, N, or D? So far, we've got all A's.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you on that one. So thank you. I've got the right audience here. How about the next one? You're muted, Francesca. You're muted.
So one person said that that's one cause, but that there are definitely others as well.
Mhm.
Knowing that. Second
Would you
question.
read the next? Mhm.
Long-standing racial discrimination has prevented people of color from building wealth through home ownership. Again, long-standing racial discrimination has prevented people of color from building wealth through home ownership. Yet again, all A's.
Mhm. I agree. Discrimination, like racism, is real, and it still exists, and it's still impacting people, particularly people of color, and you can see that in homelessness. Francesca, the third question.
Question 3, the persistence of inequality has caused African Americans to be overrepresented in the homeless population. Again, the persistence of inequality has caused African Americans to be overrepresented in the homeless population. Third time's a charm, all A's.
All right. And any comments that you need to share? All right, the case for racial equity, as you've just started to indicate, from infant mortality to life expectancy, race predicts how well you will do in education, criminal justice, health, environment, jobs, housing, and so many other things. It is particularly acute in criminal justice and health and housing. And I'm sure you know that because of the nature of the work that you do. The reality is that Black people are 13% of the population, but 40% or more are experiencing homelessness. And sorry, I'm having an issue again with this. Just not a day when Zoom wants me to be great. So 13% of the population, but 40% experiencing homelessness. Native people, 1.3% of the population, but up to 10% of those experiencing homelessness. Latinx, 18% of the population, but 22% of those experiencing homelessness. And this was from a HUD Exchange website, and it was last year in May of 2020. I suspect that the numbers are even more alarming now, given where we are and what we are seeing with regard to rents that are past due and how landlords are reacting to even the people that could pay rent and not wanting them to pay rent, just not wanting to rent to them anymore, even if they get rent assistance and their arrears are caught up. So homelessness is real and racial equity is important. Racial equity is a condition that would be achieved if racial identity was no longer a predictor of life outcomes. And life outcomes are housing, it's economics, it's health. And with racial equity, if that condition is achieved and racial identity was no longer a predictor of life outcomes, outcomes would be better for all. So it's about improving outcomes for all. And we call it racial equity because with racial equity, we center race, meaning we focus on race because people of color have historically been disadvantaged. So advancing racial equity requires involving those most impacted in decisions about things that affect their lives. That's funding, policies, programs. It's important that we normalize conversations about race when we're talking about racial equity. And to do that, I offer some definitions around terms. First, race is a social construct used to divide people into groups on the basis of physical characteristics. If you look at the graphic that's on the right, you see that basically race, the differences are physical. So we are grouped based on those physical characteristics. That is certainly what happened during the period in our country's history when Black people were enslaved. It was a social construct, a made-up idea that has no basis in science. Science says people, and the differences are in our hair texture and in the color of our skin and in our eye structure or our ear structure or other physical characteristics, but that is the extent of it. So race, a made-up idea used to divide people into groups on the basis of physical characteristics. And then racism, beliefs, attitudes, and behavior that race is a determinant of human traits and racial differences produce an inherent superiority of one race over another. Francesca, is your hand out?
Yeah, I was just adding that Lloyd put in the chat that Blacks make up less than 40% of Durham's population, but are 70 to 80% of those experiencing homelessness in Durham.
Yes, thank you. And that is the kind of information that Lloyd shared with me, which was pretty alarming. Wasn't something that I was as acutely aware of, but was happy for that. And yeah, that is an alarming statistic. So race and racism are important here. Race is what we divide people on the basis of, but racism is those beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. That race is a determinant of human traits, and racial differences produce an inherent superiority of one race over another. Racism still exists. It exists at the individual level. It also exists at the institutional and structural level. At the individual level, it's prejudice, it's discrimination, it's bigotry, it's bias, it's all the words you know by an individual based on race. But individuals work for institutions. And institutions make policies and practices that result in discriminatory treatment and inequitable opportunities and outcomes. So racial equity work involves looking for the policies and the practices that are creating discriminatory treatment and inequitable opportunities and outcomes. Structural racism is also important, and that's bias across multiple institutions working in reinforcing ways to perpetuate racial inequity. Again, these are just some of the terms that we use to frame this discussion, but all of them are still real. Individual racism, institutional racism, and structural racism, and individuals contribute to policies and practices and procedures at both the institutional and the structural level. When we're talking about racial equity, it is important to draw a distinction between the two terms that you see in front of you. I have found that we use them interchangeably. We just do, but they don't really mean the same thing. And it's important to be able to differentiate between them when we are talking about racial equity. The first graphic shows equality. And you'll note that everybody has exactly the same thing. The problem is everyone does not have access and opportunity. So it's equal, but it's not equitable. Everybody has the same box, but everybody doesn't have the same advantage. The bottom graphic shows equality on one side and equity on the other. The difference is that everyone has what they need to be successful. Equality and equity are important terms when we are talking about racial equity. And it's important that we draw a distinction between the two, because you'll hear a lot that you'll hear people say, and you'll hear institutions say, I just want to treat everybody equally. We absolutely want to treat people equally. But if your focus is purely on equality, then you miss the people that are not being served. You actually need to look for those people that are not being served, who are slipping through the cracks, who cannot be seen through just a regular lens of equality. And when you see them, you need to find ways to provide access and opportunity. And that certainly is the nature of the work that you do. I have a film that I want to share with you, so I'm going to stop and go to that. Well, let's see. If I can find another way to bring it up, because it doesn't want to come up the regular way. And this is just a YouTube video, but it's one that I like because I think it makes some good points with regard to equality and equity. So hopefully some of you have seen it before, but if there are others that aren't, I think it's particularly pertinent to any discussion of racial equity.
Before we can talk about equity versus equality, I want to first define diversity. At Inclusive Communities, we like to say diversity in its simplest definition means differences. We all have differences, from our glasses to our weight to how much money we have. That is diversity, and no matter how much people say it's hard to find diversity, that's not true. Diversity exists. It's about taking the time to acknowledge its existence and work to ensure action is taken to embrace these differences, not alienate them. Equality is often equated to fairness and sameness, and is based in the misconception that we all have the same needs and the same solution will work for everyone. Equity is based in access and opportunity, with the understanding that we each start with different advantages and disadvantages, and thus have different needs to attain access and opportunity. To understand equity, we have to compare it to equality. Now, I love this equity versus equality graphic as it's the best explanation of the difference between the two. On the equality side, you see that we've got three individuals, our tall guy, our short girl, and our friend in the wheelchair. And you see that they're all trying to watch this baseball game, but there's this fence. With equality, they've each been given a box to use to be able to see the game. But obviously that's not working because our tall friend is now super tall and sees very clearly over the fence, while our short girl can just barely see, and she's still kind of on her tiptoes and struggling to see the game, while the person in the wheelchair can't see at all and they can't even get on the box. On the equity side of this picture, you can see that now we've given each individual exactly what they need to be able to see the game. The person in the wheelchair has a ramp so they can clearly get to the top and see the full game. The shorter girl has two boxes, which is what she needed to comfortably be able to see, and the tall person has no boxes at all because they didn't need the extra assistance in the first place. Equity is a process, which means it is continuous. We can't gain equity by changing just one thing. For example, the equity side of this photo shows our friend in the wheelchair has gained equity at this fence, but the work is not done. True progressive equity is about how can we ensure that he has equitable opportunities at all of the hypothetical and real fences in his life. Equity requires power, resources, and social responsibility to work hand in hand to change the structures and provide opportunities to those who were institutionally left out, marginalized, or oppressed. Equity is hard, but it's essential for us to make change in the lives of those who have been historically depicted as less than. From individuals with disabilities like physical, developmental, and mental, to people living in poverty without access to food or education or healthcare. It's important for us to understand that there is a long history of discrimination, which has created the present day inequities, which don't allow these individuals the same access to opportunity than those who don't have those differences. One of the greatest gifts that we give to students that we work with is the opportunity to share their story and to find value in their voice. And this increases awareness and a sense of empowerment. Everyone has their own stuff. Everyone is going through something that challenges their emotional and physical capacity to be great, but there is power in connection. So now here's your challenge. Be brave and seek out those opportunities to have authentic conversations with those that are different than you. Find out what makes them unique and what brings them joy. Then you do the same. Share your story because you have value as well. Now you've built community. And with community, we have power. We is always stronger than me.
All right, what I'd like for you to do is to drop something in chat. And what you're going to drop in chat will be the completion of this sentence. We're going to first start with equality. And equality is, so you're going to finish that statement with regard to the homeless system. Equality is, and finish that in chat, please. All right, Francesca, can you let me know what you're seeing?
Nothing yet, Sharon.
All right.
We really need some Jeopardy music. So we have equality is a far off dream, providing housing for all. It's allowing all of our neighbors to obtain housing. It's treating everyone exactly the same.
Mhm.
And that's it.
And let's differentiate that from equity. So now to do the same thing for the statement that equity is. So what is equity when it comes to homeless housing?
a level playing field and treating folks the same, access and opportunity for everyone to have a home. Inadequate. Oh, equity is inadequate. Equality is treating everyone equal and the same.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry, equality is inadequate. I misread Shanta's statement.
Okay. Any other comments?
That's it for now.
All right.
Equity is ensuring that there is actually access,
Mhm.
providing housing with resources for all.
Mhm. So I'm going to stop share and stay with that for just a moment and ask you. I think somebody just dropped something else in chat. I saw something pop up.
Yep. Shanta said equity is when everyone gets exactly what they need to be successful. Shaniqua said equity is providing the needs that are needed for individuals and in different ways.
Mhm.
We also have fair housing for all. And it's Lucas says equity is centering people's voices and being guided by those with loved experience.
Yes. So,
One more. Then equality is having shelter space available for those experiencing homelessness. Equity is taking into consideration the unique challenges of our homeless neighbors of color.
mhm.
Well said.
Very well said. And so what I'd like to do before I go on with the PowerPoint is just to discuss how equity shows up in your role as case managers every day. And I think some of that was included in the comments that you just made in chat. But I wonder if there's anybody that will be comfortable unmuting and kind of sharing how equality and equity show up in your work every day, but particularly how equity shows up in the work that you are doing every day. And anyone that's comfortable unmuting yourself, please do.
I am. So
You want to introduce yourself?
I'm sorry. My name is Valerie Messick. I work for Triangle Empowerment Center.
Mm-hmm.
When you have individuals who are homeless, they are different. You have families and then you have individuals. So if you give everybody a home and you give them all the same home, a family can't fit in an individual's house. As an individual, they only need one bedroom, but a family is going to need more. Okay. A family is also going to need a little bit more assistance because they have children that they have to take care of, and those children have needs. So you're not just, when you're looking for housing for a family, it is not just for the adults, but you also need to get the children situated. Children have different needs than adults. So, children want to be someplace where there's other children. They want to be around playgrounds. Then you want to have your children in areas that that they're going to be safe. Okay. But as an individual, I'm a single individual. My only worry is where my dog is going to be. That's it. And as long as he's with me, that's fine. All right. But you also have that other thing where, as a formerly homeless individual, okay, if I would have had a pet at that time, I would worry about where he's going to be or where she's going to be. So there's a lot of things that you need to put into play when you say, let's get somebody a house. It's great to say get them one, but what do they really need? So if you do all things being equal, it doesn't work. But if you give them individually what they need to help them to help themselves, okay. As someone who has been homeless, I don't want somebody to do things for me. Okay. But I would rather you help me to help me. If that makes sense to anybody other than me.
Valerie, it made a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. I heard in that we need to be looking at the whole person.
Yes.
And all of their needs. And equity is in taking care of all of those needs and not just focusing on the one thing. Just check the box, which is equality.
Housing is not just the need. I mean, once you get in there, you got to have something to sit on, something to lay on, something to keep you warm, food to eat, something to cook it in. So there's a lot of that goes into getting someone into a home that hasn't been into one.
Yeah, you are echoing the visual that was in the film clip that I shared, where she talks about the ramp, and you don't just stop at providing the ramp. You've only done one thing. There's more. So when you're talking about equity, there are other opportunities, and you have to keep opening doors and providing access and opportunity for others, particularly the people that are in the homeless system, and you are echoing that. Thank you very much for that, Valerie.
You're
Anyone else that would be comfortable unmuting and talking about how it shows up in the work that you do every day? All right, so I'm going to continue with the presentation and talk about steps to cultivate racial equity in the homeless system. These are higher overarching things that you can do. I hope you look at this and say, these are things that we've already done in my organization, or they're things that are in progress. There's creating a racial equity task force, or some people that are working on defining equity, what it is, and how to advance racial equity in the work that you do. We call that organizing, and I'll be talking about this in terms of organizing, normalizing, and operationalizing for racial equity. So part of organizing is creating people that are working on this. Normalizing is collecting and analyzing and utilizing data. It's participating in training or growing together, making sure that you understand and you're talking about the same things when you're talking about equity. And it's creating action plans and implementing those plans. So the first thing I had was create a racial equity task force that's made up of individuals representing the continuum of care in different capacities. That group should be made up of diverse people doing the work. So people actually doing the work right now. It should be inclusive of all programs championing the end of homelessness. So it's not just one group, it's multiple groups that are involved in championing the end of homelessness, coming together to envision and develop plans on how to create equitable processes for the homeless system. Is anybody already taking this kind of step in terms of forming a group, either across organizations or in your own organization? And if you are, if you can unmute and share what it is that you're doing, that would be a good thing. All right, no takers, I will move on. So that first step was about creating a racial equity task force, some people to do the work of looking at equity and how we can be more equitable. Then you need to collect, analyze, and utilize data. You already know data is essential to the work that you do every day. You need to scope the needs of different races or ethnicities experiencing homelessness. The needs are not the same, which you already know because you're in this work. Implement new assessment questions to better understand needs. So if you're not fully able to see the whole person or to identify all of their needs, implement new assessment questions to better understand needs. Then look more extensively at data and evaluate coordinated entry and other processes. I believe coordinated entry is something that we're working on in the city of Durham. I don't know if it's fully implemented yet. And then learn to conduct root cause analysis. Where data is concerned, where equity is concerned, the question that you want to continually ask is why? Why does something exist? Why? And there are who, what, where, when, how questions in there as well. But you want to keep asking why and why and why until you can identify the root cause. Because if you don't identify root cause in your work, all you've done is taken care of a symptom. And if you took care of a symptom without identifying the root cause, what you're going to see is people coming back into the system, or recidivism. They're coming right back. So they go out and then they come right back. And that's because you've not attacked the root cause. Is anybody doing anything with collecting, analyzing, and utilizing data that would like to share what it is that you're doing?
Sharon, this is Lloyd. As we've shared in preparation for today, we've done some analysis of the HMIS data at the system level, but we haven't drilled down to look more closely at project level or even looking necessarily at individual components of the homeless housing system. For example, specifically looking at how emergency shelter exits to permanent housing might vary based on race, or how our rapid rehousing projects have different outcomes based on race. We haven't gotten to that level of analysis.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for that, Lloyd. With regard to racial equity work, outcomes are absolutely what you are looking at. And when you're doing that root cause analysis and you're looking at data, it enables you to see really clearly that, look, the outcomes are not the same. And I have differentiations, and they are by racial group. So what is it that I'm not seeing or that I'm missing? It's that kind of analysis that has to take place before you can move to, well, what is it that I can do about what it is that I'm seeing? Anyone else want to share your voice or what you're doing before we move on? So we started with create a racial equity task force, collect, analyze, and utilize data. Third step, participate in training. Grow yourself as you're thinking about racial equity work. Grow yourself and grow that team of people that are part of your task force. So grow together. If you haven't had bias training, and I'm hoping most of you already have, that is very essential to become aware of conscious and unconscious biases. Do racial equity training together on the language we use to talk about race. You have to normalize what it is that we mean when we talk about race and racism and power and stereotypes and oppression and relative advantage. All of those words matter. So what are the words that we use? Do we understand them? And are we seeing them in play in the work that we do? Take some data analysis training. You know, we try to say data is our friend. I don't know if some of you are like me. When I started doing my doctoral work, I was shocked. It was like, data is not my friend. So it took me a long time to get past that. But for the work that you do, data is critical, not just the big numbers with regard to how many they are, but the smaller numbers with regard to what's happening with the number that they are. And do I see trends, and do I see patterns, and what are they telling me about the work that we're doing and the way that we are approaching this issue? Do we need to approach it differently? And then utilize a racial equity impact assessment. So do racial equity impact assessment training. And I'll be talking a little bit more about racial impact assessment in just a couple of minutes. The final step was action your plan. Identify both the desperate, different, and positive impacts each funding, decision, policy, program, and practice will have. Revise your decision, your policy, or your program to reduce the disparate or different impacts and advance the positive, more equitable impact. Use disaggregated data. That's data that you've separated by race, and that is very important in your work. So I believe that's something many of you are already doing. So use that data and feedback from those with lived experience. That's what we heard today, lived experience, to monitor the impact of decisions on each population. Where you find continued disparities, refine and revise the decision, the policy, or the program, and continue to monitor. So I'm going to go back to where we started and show you the model again. 4 parts to cultivate racial equity in the homeless system. Create a group of people who are talking about this, who are planning things together. Collect, analyze, and utilize data participate in training, and operationalize or action your plans. Any comments, anyone, before I move on to using a racial equity impact assessment? All right, Lloyd, you got a really quiet group today. I thought they were going to be more conversational, so I didn't put as much in this PowerPoint, but hopefully you won't be too bored, and hopefully I'll have an opportunity now to give you a chance to use this model. Hopefully some of you are using a racial equity impact assessment model. If you haven't, we are part of an organization called GARE, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, and the Center for Social Justice developed this impact assessment model. So this is an abbreviated version of their model. We use a racial equity impact assessment model to identify a disparity in access or services or housing for a group in the homeless system. Why does a disparity exist? Is there data? What's causing or contributing to the disparity? What strategy can you use to address or mitigate the disparity? What is the potential impact on each group? If you implement something different, who will benefit or be burdened? How can you mitigate harm? Constantly monitor and evaluate based on data and lived experience, and refine, revise, and continue to monitor. So a racial equity impact assessment tool is designed to help you identify disparities and then to plan around them. So thinking about the work that you do every day in homeless housing, where are there potential disparities in access or services or housing for people that are in the homeless system in Durham? Please drop a response in chat. So where is a potential disparity in access or services or housing? And we're going to walk through this model together. So I'm going to stop sharing. It's going to be smaller. All right. And Francesca, please let me know what it is that you're seeing that's coming up.
So far, we've got housing, affordable housing.
Dr. Williams, do you want us to select one of these three, or do you want us to say what the difference is in one of those places?
Yeah, I was hoping that I would get what the disparity is in one of those. And I'm not yet a doctor. I want to be one day. Thank you for that, Malcolm. But it's identify a disparity. So let me be a little bit more specific and say, can you identify a difference in access based on a group's participation? Access to services, to housing, or just in access to the system? Can you identify a disparity? A disparity might be with regard to access if the places that had housing available for people that were in the system weren't located on a bus route, or weren't located in communities that were accessible, or weren't located in places where people could get to them. So we know that the need is heaviest in zip code 27703. But the places that can provide support are in 27717. And I made that up. I don't know that that's real, right? Then there are potential disparities in access to utilizing that housing. So I'm just looking for any ideas you have about disparities in access or services or housing for a group in the homeless system.
Sharon, Lloyd again, I think we got a good example or a disparity suggested in the chat, particularly around housing for people with felony convictions, because we know that There's been lots of racial disparities in the criminal justice system over the last 2 generations or more. And so when those disparities in the way justice and the laws of the society are implemented, those impact individual people, and so that contributes to higher rates of people experiencing homelessness from blacks and people of color in our society.
And we know that people of color are disproportionately justice involved.
Right, right. That's what I was trying to say.
So it's a great example. So then the question becomes, is there data that supports what it is that Lloyd just said? So do we have data that will tell us about people that have been justice involved who are also homeless, and that there is a disparity with regard to outcomes because they don't have access to some of the services because of their background? So is there data that will tell us more about that population? And I mean data that we can disaggregate by race, by gender, by zip code.
We have a lot of good responses in chat right now, Sharon.
Go ahead.
It's got access to resources, discharge status for veterans, housing for felons. I don't know what this means, but VISPDAT scoring. Access to services for felons or veterans that do not have honorable discharge. And then Malcolm said the standardized assessment tool we have been using for people experiencing homelessness, which is a factor in who gets prioritized for subsidies, has been shown to perpetuate racial disparities. Excellent, or not excellent.
Yeah, no, they're very good.
Then we have persons on the sex offender registry, youth housing options. And then for folks coming out of incarceration, access to emergency housing and affordable housing. Speaking of criminal records, we know that statistics show white people with criminal records are more likely to get job interviews than Black people without records. Youth aging out of foster care. And disparities in the quality of housing depending upon the client's background, criminal credit, income, etc., even when they're receiving the necessary services to help them improve those barriers.
And so when we're using, thanks for that, Francesca, when we're using a racial equity impact assessment, we're identifying the disparity or the potential for there to be a disparity that exists. And you've done that. You've even went further and said, why does this disparity exist? And that's part of this work. And then is there data? Because the data tells a story. And with regard to racial equity work, there should always be data. And if there's not, you want to find a way to collect that data that validates what it is that you are saying is an issue. Then what's causing or contributing to the disparity? So is there something else that's causing or contributing to the disparities that you are seeing? In other words, are there underlying issues? And you know this because when you, as Valerie talked about earlier, when you do intakes, when people are coming to you, when you're managing cases, it's important that you see the whole person. And the whole person means you're looking for cause. So what's causing or contributing to what it is that we are seeing? And what strategy then can we use to address or mitigate the disparity? So it's not enough just to know that it exists. The work of racial equity is to figure out how we can address or mitigate the disparity. And we're going to
Malcolm added to the chat that landlords and property managers also using equal instead of equitable standards for tenant selection plans around criminal backgrounds.
Thank you for that. That is one that I hadn't thought of, but that is a very good one. So strategy is important. Anytime you develop a strategy where racial equity is concerned, you have to assess the potential impact. So what is the potential impact on each group? And by each group, I mean when you divide it up based on race or gender or their military discharge status or their felony background, justice involved background status. What's the potential impact of what it is that you're trying to do if you implemented it, who would benefit and who would be burdened, and how can you mitigate harm. And for every decision that you make using a racial equity impact assessment, you have to monitor and evaluate based on data and lived experience. So there's quantitative data and there's qualitative data. And that qualitative, that lived experience is just as important as the quantitative data, the numbers that provide evidence. Part of what we can do, part of what I read about, part of what's important in the work that you do is bringing that lived experience forward and valuing what people have to say about their experience and about how they're being impacted. And then when you're using a racial equity impact assessment, you have to refine, revise, and continue to monitor. All of those things are important when using racial equity impact assessment. And sorry, I wasn't sharing the PowerPoint right then. I was just trying to have a discussion with you so I could see it, but you couldn't. So thank you for that reminder. So that's the model again. Identifying the groups, you did a great job of that. Why does this disparity exist? You know that. Is there data? And in the city of Durham, with our employees, we're finding that a lot of times we are reluctant to dig into data, but that data tells a story. And so understanding and being able to access and analyze or even collect data is very important. Understanding what's causing or contributing, that's underlying factors, is important. Developing strategy is important. Always assessing impact, and assessing impact by group is important. Monitor and evaluation is important, and then refine, revise, and contribute, and continue to monitor. And sorry, something just popped up on my screen. And anytime it does, it's going to impact the PowerPoint. So hang on, everybody. Let's see, can I get it back? All right. So racial equity work then involves identifying disparities, collecting, analyzing, and utilizing data, understanding why, and developing solutions that are focused on providing what people need to be successful, along with continuously monitoring, measuring, refining, and revising. So advancing racial equity, these were my takeaways. So these were kind of my reminders to you. Use a racial equity impact assessment to guide decision-making. Understand and be in touch with your own biases and how they might be impacting decisions that you are making, which means impacting how you are serving the people that are part of your case management. Gather input, advice, and recommendations from the population served on an ongoing basis. If you're not collecting data from that population, you should be. What is their lived experience? So lived experience should be part of your data collection. Track outcomes. What is actually happening to people? What are the outcomes that they are seeing? It's critically important to this work because we know that outcomes are worse for people of color across the board because of historical inequities. Measure progress over time. Remove barriers when you can. Focus on developing solutions that are transformative and that impact multiple systems. And build equity into the structure of the response system.
Sharon, there's no PowerPoint right now.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I'm trying to share and Zoom is really giving me issues today. My apologies, everyone. I'm trying. It's just not my Zoom day. All right. Are you able to see anything now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So this is what I just said. The thing that we went over previously before this was a racial equity impact assessment. You can use that to guide your decision making, and that is something I recommend that you do. Be in touch with your own biases. We all have them. And so when we say we don't have biases or prejudices, we do. Understand them, understand how they might be impacting you. Gather input, advice, and recommendations from the population served on an ongoing basis. Because what they can share with you is their lived experience, what it is that's happening to them in terms of outcomes. If you can get to the root cause, the why, then you will identify something you can do something about. You want to make sure that you are tracking outcomes, measuring progress, and when you can, removing barriers. You want to develop solutions that are transformative and that impact multiple systems. And you want to build equity into the structure of the response system. All right, that is what I had for today. So thanks for participating today. I didn't expect to end this early, but I am actually done. Lloyd, you can tell me if you want to do some kind of breakout where people can use the model or practice using the model to discuss something from their workplace.
I have one question that I'd invite your thoughts on, and maybe others have questions as well to continue the discussion. Some people in the workshop might say, well, so we'll wait for the Durham Continuum of Care and the Community Development Department as the Continuum of Care lead agency to pull together a racial equity task force for the Durham homeless housing system. That could be one response to today's workshop. Could you talk about the value of individual organizations and institutions also, not waiting necessarily for a system-wide implementation, but how could for example, one of our homeless housing providers, what would be the value of their doing racial equity assessments within their own organization?
Thank you for that. Whoever brought that forward, I think a good question. System-wide is ideal, but it's not always possible. We have all kinds of things tugging on us, and I know that you absolutely have things that are tugging on you, and you've got the case management work that you do every day and on an ongoing basis for your institutions. So system-wide is ideal. However, when you can't wait for that, you can do things in your own organization. What you want to make sure is that if you're going to build a task force in your own organization, that you have commitment to participation, that it is diverse and inclusive, and that it also includes the voice of residents. So you need some people on there that have experienced homelessness and have experienced being sheltered or unsheltered, so that you can hear their voice as well. So while system-wide is the ordeal, and I'm hoping that Durham gets there, because it's being done in some other jurisdictions and they're trying it. So we've got to start somewhere. I know that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of coordination. So in terms of starting somewhere, start where you are. Just make sure that the team you put together is diverse and that you do have representation from the people that are being served as part of that discussion.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. This is an opportunity for other questions. And so I invite them. If you have some, I may not be able to answer, but there are other voices out there. So if other people have ideas or thoughts that you want to share, this is your time. So please do.
Sharon, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
This is Malcolm White. On your last slide, you talked about, or you listed track outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are some of us who are working on a gaps analysis that is including an element of evaluating racial equity in our system right now. And I think that those of us who are on this or in this training and on that committee are seeing that we have some places to really raise our game. And the part that I just have a question with is this may be my sort of my blind spot about being able to have conversations and not always being able to track outcomes. But could you talk about what tracking outcomes would look like from that, when you talk about from that qualitative perspective, after you have identified a disparate impact and then looked into making some changes? I guess I'm just looking at, how do you track outcomes that aren't just someone saying, I feel different about this?
Mhm.
Could you give a couple of examples, maybe, if you, for places where we can look?
So I can, and because I don't know your system as well, I'd invite others to join in this conversation. But when I talk about outcomes, I'm thinking about, for example, people that are placed, and I know many are already doing this, people that are placed in a housing situation. And for whatever reason, they lose that housing situation, or they go out of the system and they come back in. Tracking outcomes is tracking what is happening to them and what they look like. So is that happening more with Blacks than it is with whites? And if so, why is it happening? For example, imagine a person that got a housing situation and then got a job, and the job required them to work second shift or third shift, and they would get home at an hour that was past the time that residential facility would allow them access, or they would be arriving because of bus service at a time when they didn't have access. So then they lose that housing situation and they're homeless again. You've got to figure out what it is that's going on with them that's causing them to keep coming back. And if you can see that, which is seeing the whole person, you've seen that the outcomes are different. In this case, they may be the same for all of the people in the community, but if they are different and they're different based on race, then you want to say, why is this? And you want to keep asking why until you find something that you can do something about.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm. That's just one example. There are many with regard to tracking outcomes. Anyone else that's tracking outcomes that wants to talk about what it is that you're doing and the outcome that you're looking at and that you're tracking? All right, really quiet group today. Well, Lloyd, anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I want to invite you to talk more about your work in the Equity and Inclusion Department and racial equity. Particularly, you mentioned the ongoing task of monitoring, right? That this is work that is going to take months, years, decades for us to work on, right? Mm-hmm. This is not instant gratification work, we might say. Right. So could you share something about how you see your work in the city contributing to a more equitable framework within the city administration and potentially the long-term impacts of your work for the Durham community as a whole? Okay. For example, would you see that potentially over the long term, your work in equity and inclusion would help reduce the racial disparities that we see in the homeless housing system over the long term? Mm-hmm. Not tomorrow.
Right. So thank you for that, Lloyd. And what he's talking about is real. The work of racial equity isn't fast. It isn't easy. And you're not going to see results overnight, but it is important. In the city of Durham, we are and have been advocates for racial equity for a long time. And we're just now starting to see results. And so I'll use what we do as an example. In 1990, the city of Durham did ban the box. Ban the box is removing the box that you check that says you're a felon on an employment application. Why? Well, long ago, we realized that people of color were disproportionately impacted by the justice system. And so by having that box there, we were banning people who were coming out, who were looking for a way to transform themselves and to transform their lives to avoid recidivism, going back into the system. So that was an important consideration. We did it in 1990. We still do background checks. So we know when people have been justice involved, but that is not a determinant of whether or not you can work for the city of Durham. What it is that you bring in terms of your skill set and your commitment and how you show up is a determinant of whether or not you can work for the city of Durham. We track the outcomes for those people. In most cases, it has worked. In some, it hasn't. But that has not stopped us from doing what we did in terms of banning the box. Does that kind of thing have an impact on the community? Yes, because it can influence other institutions to do the same thing, particularly institutions that are servicing residents of the city of Durham, right? So part of it is exerting influence in the community by doing that. The other part is embracing our community. We're also, as part of the work that we do, really emphasizing community engagement and hearing the voice of the community. And the community is loud and clear that they are concerned about homelessness. And so that's what the $95 million bond was about. But we know that it's not enough. And we know that the problem is continuing to get worse. And so for the city, it's constantly trying to figure out, what can we do? How can we impact this? How can we better support the agencies that are doing this work? How can we work more collaboratively and collectively with them? For us, the most important part of that is the beginning of that, which is hearing the voice of the community. So when I talk to you, that's what I also say, that when you are talking in your agencies, you want to hear the voice of your clients. What are they saying about what they are experiencing and why they are experiencing it? And is there a nugget in there, a something that you can get to by asking why, that you can do something about? That is the work of racial equity. And Lloyd, that was kind of an abbreviated answer because you asked a great big question, but we are on that road and trying to engage the community in every conversation that we can, to the point of exhaustion. I think most recently we asked the community, what would you like to see us do with ARPA money? ARPA is American Rescue Plan Act. The city got 51 million and we got 26 million upfront. And the federal government has said that you should really use that to advance racial equity in the community. So ours right now is listening to that community voice. Malcolm?
Thanks, Sharon. Just wondering if you can talk about, well, let me back up. So as a resident of Durham, I'm very grateful that my city government I find to be a progressive organization around racial equity. And I wanted to see if, as you're able, if you could highlight any work that your department is doing around involvement or partnership with the implementation of city contracts for things like with the developers who will be building the products of the paid for with that $95 million bond?
Yeah, you raise a great question. The department that Francesca and I work in actually does the contracting and procurement part. And what we know is that we have incredible disparity when it comes to how the city of Durham is spending residents' money, because that's what we are funded by. There is huge disparity. The question that we have to ask is why. So by asking those questions, what we got to is that a lot of the businesses that are owned by minority contractors, particularly Black and brown contractors, are smaller businesses. And so they're not able to bid on some of the larger jobs. So we're looking at how do we put them together with some of the larger contractors who are bidding on these jobs to be subcontractors and provide opportunity in that way. And what can we put in some of these RFPs that will necessitate your having people of color as subcontractors and utilizing them and giving them a certain percentage of the business. We have some limitations that are state and federal government limitations. So there's some things that we can do. There are other things that we can't. But we have huge disproportionality, and we're busy trying to find the barriers and to remove the barriers. So we know that the RFP process is cumbersome. It's way too complex, and that the vendors, potential vendors, say, I can't do all of this, or I don't understand all of this. So we're providing support there. We're putting the contractors together, the major contractors and the ones that are smaller contractors together. So we're giving them forums where they can meet and expand their networks and hopefully form some new relationships and partnerships so they can be in business together. So we're trying, but it's huge and it's a lot of work. So it's one bite of the apple at a time.
Thank you. And is the department working with like contractor co-ops? I have a friend who I imagine is working with the department, and I don't want to share all of that information, but who does this particular work, right, for minority contractors to group them together in some of those for bids on municipal jobs. So I just was wondering if that was on the radar of the department as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like
So yes, we do.
Exist.
We do have relationships with some of them. I don't know which ones as much because Francesca and I work on the organizational and community side, and they work more with the contracting side. But I do know that that work is in progress. And yeah, we do work with some of those organizations.
Great.
Great question, Malcolm. Thanks for raising that. Anyone else in the community have questions? Got a few more minutes. You want to raise a question for Sharon or for others on the webinar workshop today? All right. Well, I think we're going to move towards adjournment. On the menu on the bottom of your screen, the very last one on the right is a reaction. We're not going to be able, Sharon's not going to be able to hear us unless you unmute yourselves, but if you open that on the upper left, there's a couple icons. One is for applause. Next one is a thumbs up. If the session made you cry, you can also put that into on your screen. Sharon, thank you so very much for leading this session. It is recorded for posterity and will be posted within the next week to the durhamcoc.org website. We're very grateful for your leading us today, grateful for your larger work in the city, helping us create a more equitable and inclusive city government and a community as well in Durham as a whole. Thank you so very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you, everybody. I will make the presentation available. I just need to do some minor adjustments to it, and I will make it available along with some notes that I'll include on the different slides. You are always welcome to contact me if you have any questions about anything. I'm sharon.williams@durhamnc.gov.
Very good. Thanks again, Sharon. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Our next session will be not on September 17th, but it's being postponed a week to September 24th. We look forward to having you join us then, and we'll send out more information as that date approaches. Thanks again. Enjoy the day and the weekend. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Sharon, I'm going to hop on the Teams meeting.
Yeah, I am too. That's where I'm going next.